2007 Jeep Commander, and we got to do the rack and pinion and power steering pump on this thing. I'll lift it off the ground, get a jack under there on both sides, support the vehicle, and then the first thing I've done here is remove the nut off the bottom of the outer tie rod end. So this is the inner tie rod end, and this is the outer tie rod end, and this threads onto there to give you your length, and that's part of setting your alignment on the vehicle. We'll do our best to try and keep that same measurement, but odds are we're going to have to take this in and get a wheel alignment done after we finish the job, which in most cases isn't that expensive. The universal joint there, that's coming from the steering column, goes to the rack and pinion. There's a bolt on the side there. Remove it entirely. It's a pinch style friction fit. Might need to put in a screwdriver, a wedge or something to open it up a little bit to pry that off of there. Just below that's going to be our two lines that go into the rack and pinion. So we'll have to disconnect those as well. Maybe have a bucket for the fluid if it's going to leak out of there. Right there is one of the bolts for this is the catch tray underneath of the oil filter. This is on the front of the vehicle. You could see that that's kind of the trough of the tray to help you drain the oil into a bucket there. So this bolt is on the front. And then on the back, there is this bracket. You see where it bolts on there? So technically, I guess if you just take that top bolt out and the front one, you should be good. You may have to remove these lines. So there's a bolt here. There's one there for that line. And then right there on the end. And this, you might have to move this out of your way. You may not. Just be prepared for that if you need to. Right here's one of the bolts for the rack and pinion itself that bolts into the frame. So there's one there, and there's going to be one here. You can see the rack and pinion right here. What we can do is we can remove this support here for the front differential. So we've got 3 bolts there, and there's going to be one here and one here. After we remove this, it'll give us just a little more room and articulation to wiggle our rack and pinion in and out of place. To remove that universal joint off the top of the rack and pinion, that's going to be a 1/2 inch socket for that bolt that goes in there. You need to remove that bolt entirely because I do believe that there's a notch in the shaft that prevents it from lifting up. And then you shouldn't have too much trouble pushing that up and getting that off of there. When it comes to these 2 lines, they're really close together. What I ended up doing was I removed the oil filter right there, let it drain first, and then I removed the tray underneath. Again, that's going to be a 1/2 inch socket to remove the bolts on that. Oil filter and tray removed gives us some more room to get our tools in there. In my case, it was an 18mm wrench. Then with those removed, I can fit my wrench in, long enough wrench that I can get some leverage to break those loose. I removed the bottom one first, and then once I got the bottom one, then I had more room to work on the top one there. So that was the sequence of events that I used to disassemble those pieces there. We've removed 2 bolts that hold the rack and pinion in. We're going to have one there, and we're going to have one there. And there it is laying down there, and in my case, that was a 15/16. We got a impact on the front, and then we got a combo wrench on the back to hold the nut there, and that's how we remove that. Right there is going to be like a stabilizer for the front differential. And there it is laying on the ground, and we've got 18mm for the 3 bolts and 16mm for the 2 bolts. Remove that, and the front differential will drop down slightly. It's still held in place by 2 other spots, and then that'll give you a little bit more room to get this rack and pinion out of here. We want to remove the inner and outer tie rod ends on the end of the rack and pinion. That's just going to give us some more room to be able to remove it and install it. What we'll have to do is disconnect the boot here. And the last time what I did was I just used 2 zip ties on there. And the reason I used the 2 zip ties on there is when we installed it last time, I was working in that little space there. I found it just to be a better method to use the 2 zip ties, and then if you have to remove it for any reason instead of the metal clip, you can cut those easily with some cutters, some side cutters and stuff. Side cutters, cut that off, remove the big end, and then I got normal pliers for the pinch clamp that's going to be on this end. And then we take that boot and then we move it down to get access to this piece here. And I end up using a pipe wrench because that's round, and there might be some slight flat spots on there, but not enough for me to use any kind of wrench. And what size, who knows, right? So I just use a pipe wrench and I'm gonna twist that out of there. Now that shaft isn't gonna turn because it's gonna have the gearing in it, so you don't have to worry about holding that shaft. You just spin that out of there. The other thing that you want to check is you want to make sure that that end is nice and tight, because that's kind of like a ball joint there, and then a ball joint here. So you want to make sure that both of those are good and tight. If not, you might want to replace them. Looks like this is the spot that we have to remove the driver's side, because all of our business end of this rack and pinion is not going to go through that window in the frame. But we're working at it right here, which is pretty much directly in the middle of the A-frame here. So what I did was I got my pipe wrench on there, and then I'm using a bar, and I'm gonna put that bar in the hole there, and I'm gonna hold the body of the rack and pinion while I'm turning loose our inner and outer tie rod in there. It's gonna be a little bit of playing around to try and get this thing out, and the reason is the location of these lines here, this and this, they kind of get in your way. Perhaps if they would have relocated those somewhere else, like if they were clocked up higher or something like that, it may have helped. But basically that's going to be the problem right there, those two lines, basically where they come up like that. First thing is, you can see the fluid dripping out of there, so if you have the foresight to put some plugs in there and save yourself from getting that rain down on you while you're trying to remove this, because it's gonna be a bit of a Jenga situation to get this out. So it starts off in its original position, and then we're gonna take this and we're gonna bring it over to the passenger side, and we're gonna bring it in through that window there. In between these two lines, this is the portion that's gonna be in the window, and then you can rotate that as you have to, clockwise, counterclockwise, to take the business end, and we wanna turn that downwards so that we can get it around everything that's in the way, the front differential and the frame and so on and so forth. And then what we want to do as we're rotating that, we want to also drop that end down, and this end is angled up. And in the end, we're going to have it turned all the way around again so that that is actually sitting up, and then you should be able to get it out. Another thing you may have to do is use the floor jack up against the front differential just to lift and lower that while you're articulating the rack and pinion to try and get it out, just so you have enough room. It's a pretty limited space there to deal with and try and get it out. So again, it might help if you put some plugs in there so you don't have that dripping down on you while you're doing this. You see our new one here, and we're gonna have to break those bands on both sides and remove those inner tie rod ends so that we can get this in there. We'll remove those, and then we will put it in reverse of the way we took it out. Here's the beginning of that installation. It's kind of resting there by itself right now. So I have the floor jack that's holding up the front differential to give us enough room to start sliding it through that window there. You can see that I have the business end facing down. When I take that end over here on the passenger side and I'm going to clock it, I'm going to rotate it as I'm pushing it towards the passenger side to get it to come in, over and through. Here you can see as I'm turning it, I'm rotating it, and I'm also moving it to push it to the passenger side and rotate that business end right there. In this location, as it is right now, with the jack holding up the front differential, you just play around with this thing until you get this side on the passenger side shoved through the hole, the window, and then you're just going to articulate it until you get it to where you need it. We've pretty much pushed that as far as it'll go this way. And we have that end sticking out on the passenger side. So now what we can do is we can let the front differential down with the jack, and hopefully that'll drop that down and give us some more wiggle room there that we can turn that up, And once we turn that up, then we can shift it back over to the driver's side. So we've let that front differential down all the way. And now you can see the business end is pushed all the way over to the passenger side. And we have this end sticking out as far as it'll go. Now with it in this position, we can put our tie rod end on the driver's side again. We've reinstalled our old inner and outer tie rod ends. We did not change those at all. We should be pretty good for wheel alignment. At least we'll be really close as to where it was before. When you disassemble the inner tie rod end, you'll find that there'll be some thread locker on there. So I just threw some blue thread locker on there, and then I also went in and I give it a little extra grease inside there. A good way to tell that the inner tie rod is good is if you can take this and you can spin it and it turns that outside piece. That means that you've got really good friction in there and that it's still good joint. This one here isn't bad. It's still stiff. I can move this. But if you go on the driver's side, this is really loose. You can take that, move it all over the place. That one's gonna have to be replaced. I don't have a replacement right now, but we're gonna take this in for wheel alignment when we're done, and we'll get them to change the outers at that time. Here's the bellows boot that we've got installed here. We've got a pinch clamp on this side. And in there, what I'm doing is I'm using 2 zip ties to get all the way around that diameter there. And now that I've got that tight, I'm just gonna clip off the excess. Now it should easily move into place as you need it to. And we've got that centered. And then we've tightened our bolts to bolt it to the frame. That's gonna be a 15/16. And then we've bolted up the stabilizer for the front differential here. And the 3 bolts are gonna be an 18 mil, and the 2 to the frame here are gonna be a 16 mil. We've rattled all those tight with the impact. After bolting in that rack and pinion, all we have to do is rotate this inner and outer tie rod. And we're gonna just rotate that until it fits into the steering knuckle here. In my case, the bottom nut is gonna be a 7/8. Mine's like a jam nut, lock nut style, where it's got a Teflon locker in there. Some will be a castle nut with a locking pin. Torque that up. I'm just using the impact for that.